Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is February 25th. On this day in 1975, the city of Nashville, Tennessee was shaken when 9-year-old Marcia Trimble was abducted while she was out selling Girl Scout cookies. Marcia's disappearance and the search that followed captured national attention, but for over 3 decades, justice remained out of reach. In this episode, we'll walk through the events of that tragic night, the intense investigation that followed, the long-standing suspicion that fell on an innocent teenager, and the eventual breakthrough that finally sent the right man to prison. Let's get started. It was a chilly evening on February 25th, 1975, when Marcia Trimble, a bright and outgoing Girl Scout, set out to deliver cookies in her neighborhood of Green Hills, an affluent community just outside of Nashville. Delivering cookies was something she'd done many times before, and she loved knocking on doors, chatting with neighbors, and collecting money to support her troop. But this night was different. As the hours ticked by and Marcia didn't return home, her family's worry quickly turned to panic. Her mother, Virginia Trimble, called neighbors hoping that somebody had seen Marcia. When no one had, she contacted the police. Word of Marcia's disappearance spread rapidly. Within hours, the people of Green Hills rallied together, determined to find her. Hundreds of volunteers, neighbors, friends, even strangers searched the streets, fields, and wooded areas surrounding the neighborhood. Police officers combed through every possible lead, and the FBI even joined the search, bringing in additional resources. The community's fear grew with each passing day. News crews reported from the scene, and Marcia's smiling face was plastered across newspapers and television screens. But despite everyone's best efforts, there was no sign of the young girl. As days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. But the people of Nashville refused to give up. They clung to the belief that Marcia would be found and brought home safely. But then on Easter Sunday, March 30th, 1975, 33 days after Marcia vanished, those hopes were tragically shattered. Her body was found in a garage near her home, hidden beneath a tarp. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The news sent shockwaves through the community. Children who had once played freely now stayed indoors. Doors that had once been unlocked were now bolted shut. The sense of safety and security that had defined Green Hills was gone and was replaced by fear and heartbreak. As police scrambled to find Marcia's killer, suspicion quickly fell on 15-year-old Jeffrey Womack, a boy who lived nearby. Jeffrey was one of the last people known to have seen Marcia alive. He told police that Marcia had knocked on his door the night she disappeared, but he had sent her away because he didn't have money to buy cookies. However, when police searched Jeffrey, they found a half roll of pennies, a $5 bill, and a condom in his pocket. And these were details that, in the eyes of investigators, seemed suspicious. After all, he clearly had enough money to buy a box of cookies, so why did he lie and say he didn't? And also, why did this 15-year-old boy have a condom in his pocket? Jeffrey explained that the condom was unrelated to Marcia and that he had no reason to harm her. But the police were not convinced. His decision to consult a lawyer and limit his cooperation with the investigation only fueled investigators' suspicions. Despite a lack of physical evidence, Jeffrey's name quickly became synonymous with the case. Whispers and rumors followed him wherever he went, and it cast a dark shadow over his life. 5 years later, in 1980, Jeffrey was arrested and charged with Marcia's murder. But there simply wasn't any solid evidence, and so the charges were eventually dropped. But the suspicion still lingered, and for decades, Jeffrey lived under the weight of a crime he didn't commit. As the years passed, Marcia's case grew cold. Investigators retired, leads dried up, and the case files gathered dust. But her family never gave up hope. In the early 2000s, advancements in forensic science offered a renewed sense of possibility. DNA evidence collected from the crime scene was re-examined using modern techniques, but initial comparisons didn't match anyone in the database. Then, in 2008, there was a breakthrough. The DNA profile finally had a match, and the man it matched to was Jerome Sidney Barrett, a man with a long history of sexual violence. In fact, Barrett had been arrested shortly after Marcia's disappearance for assaulting a woman in the same neighborhood. Yet at the time, no one had connected him to Marcia's case. The discovery was both a relief and a source of anguish. For years, an innocent teenager had lived under a cloud of suspicion while the real perpetrator had gone unnoticed and continued to kill. In 2008, more than 3 decades after Marcia's death, Jerome Barrett was charged with her murder. The trial, held in 2009, drew national attention as prosecutors presented the DNA evidence that linked Barrett to the crime. The defense argued that the evidence was flawed, but the prosecution's case was solid. After decades of waiting, Marcia's family finally heard the words that they had longed to hear: guilty. Barrett was convicted on second-degree murder and sentenced to 44 years in prison to be served consecutively with the life sentence he was already serving for another murder. For Marcia's family, the verdict brought a sense of justice, but it could never erase the pain of losing their beloved daughter in such a horrifying and brutal way. Marcia Trimble's death left a lasting mark on Nashville as well. The case changed the way parents watched their children and fostered a new awareness of the dangers that could lurk even in the safest of neighborhoods. Law enforcement agencies across the country also learned valuable lessons from the investigation, particularly about the dangers of tunnel vision. The wrongful suspicion cast on Jeffrey Womack served as an important reminder that it's evidence that needs to be pursued, not assumptions. Advancements in forensic science, particularly DNA analysis, have since transformed the way that crimes are investigated. I mean, we're talking 1975 here, and it's 2025. Over the last 50 years, what once seemed impossible, like solving a decades-old case, is now reality. And while those advancements came too late to spare Jeffrey from years of suspicion, they ultimately brought justice to Marcia's family and finally cleared his name once and for all. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found this episode compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast, and tell a friend. Be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day, True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!